I've been playing and reviewing a lot of games from the mid-2000s lately, and I was finding myself getting all rosy-eyed and all nostalgic. I'm saying to Raph, oh mate, games from the 2000s, they are quality, mate. I kind of half realised that, this is all just bias, and no, it's not. Games peaked in 2005. That's it. I'm saying that now. Games in the 2000s were legitimately better than they are now. And I'm going to back this up. So hold up. Back in the day, the very earliest days of computer games were made by like one guy or maybe two guys. They'd make some game for the Spectrum, get it duplicated on some tapes, and then make another one, right? And then obviously over the years, then maybe games were made by a small team of people. They were making what they wanted, and if it was successful, then, they could continue. One day, this thing called publishing is invented, and publishers, they come along and they say, well, you know what, instead of scrounging money from selling your previous game, we'll just fund you now. We just want to cut at the end. Well, that seems fair enough, doesn't it? Because now we can just get straight into making the next game. And from that, the industry then grows very rapidly in a very short period of time. By the late 90s, games teams were now up to like 20, 40 people. Your typical computer game development budget was up to about $1 million. The 2005, as I said before, this is the absolute pinnacle of this. This is the tip of the bell curve, and it's the point of this video. The 6th console generation, PS2, Xbox. The technology has rushed on so fast in that time, and there's enough money now and enough manpower on deck to make any game you want. The technology was around to make anything look very, very good. It wasn't quite good enough to be called realistic. The fact that they weren't able to be realistic is probably the last instance of limitation that forced developers to be more creative and more innovative. There's more style in these games because they weren't able to make them completely realistic. The rulebook still hadn't been written at this point, control schemes weren't still established, genres hadn't really even been defined. Creators were forced to draw from their own wells. They were making a lot of this stuff for the first time. So there's a sense of playfulness and creativity. There's a sense of real innovation without the borders that we see in games nowadays. I mean, just think about how many fantastic franchises came about in that PS2 era. Now, obviously, I'm not a complete idiot. It didn't always work. Of course, breaking ground and being creative is inherently risky, and, shit games are inevitable and they've always been around. But because games only cost like $1 to $2 million, that risk-taking kind of punk rock attitude of those very early developers was still around, and it could still weather a loss or two, Even in 2005, by this point, your average development budget was about $5 to $10 million. So again, it's a lot of money, but big companies can weather $5 million. It's not that big of a deal. When he's talking about his experience with developing God of War, the game director David Jaffe, he spoke about this complete creative control that Sony afforded him. They let him go about making his game on his own terms, and they gave him a good amount of money to do it. He says that God of War was made out of passion, not fear, and it was a game that he had designed as something that he himself would want to play. And that's not the only one. The stories like this don't exist in a vacuum from this era. You don't have to look very far to see stories of lots of circa 2000s developers working with massive publishers, but being given a huge amount of creative freedom. I want to call this the spirit of 2005. It's this spirit just to go out there and make your dreams come true. As a case in point, this is the top 100 games of all time according to Metacritic. I've organised the chart here by year, and I've applied a trend curve so that you can actually see here, no bamboozling, 2005 actually has the highest number of top rated games in history. Once we go into 2005, you can actually see that, man, like every game is a banger from that year. More games are coming out all the time now. There's loads more coming out every day than there was in 2005. The industry is making more money than it had ever even conceived of in 2005. But when I'm looking back at this data and I'm looking at these games, why isn't all that money translating into better games? What happened in 2005 that made it the industry's most popular year? That's a mystery. When Halo 2 launched in 2004, it outsold Pirates of the Caribbean, and this was a point where it was clear to everyone that games were big business. This was a license to print money. If anything, this is probably the turning point of the entire industry. Investors and publishers had just coined this term AAA game, and this was a way of separating these bigger budget Halo 2s from, I guess, more normal run-of-the-mill computer games. The Xbox 360 actually launched in 2005, and by this point, the term AAA was well entrenched in the culture. We've got these big publisher or shareholder-backed AAA games with these budgets that are like $20 to $50 million now. In a short period of time, the cost of making a computer game has come from whatever change you've got kicking around in your pocket to the GDP of a small island nation. In order to develop on these brand new consoles, developers needed to pony up some serious bank because they now needed to take on a huge amount of staff, they needed to buy new computers and get all this new technology, or they might as well just watch the industry leave them behind. In most cases, in fact, these developers would have to rely entirely on publisher money. One instance of this would be when Free Radical tried to develop Haze for the PlayStation 3. All the way through the development, Ubisoft were insisting that Free Radical just crush more and more features into the game, to maximize its market appeal and I suppose by extension to lessen the risk of their investment. Free Radical actually a really good analogy for this period of the games industry. Only a few years before they were the darlings of the industry, they couldn't do anything wrong. Once you get to the Haze end of the story, they're overworked, they're underpaid, they're having mental breakdowns. The company just ripped itself apart from the inside. The AAA mega hits that these investors and shareholders were all demanding, it flew in the face of what FRD were about. The idea of these riskier creative games that just made enough money so that we can continue doing what we love, it doesn't balance up when people are wanting to give you a $50 million budget to make a computer game. These guys don't even want HP sauce at the barbecue because they like ketchup and most people like ketchup, so we don't even want HP to be an option. Now, with these massive amounts of money being thrown about, it's now typical to see development teams of over 100 people. I mean, nowadays, it's now several hundred. In fact, it's probably about 1,000 once you include like marketers and satellite teams and all the other peripherals involved in launching a massive game. You've got producers, directors, middle managers. There's so many people involved. Even just an art team will now fill up a whole room at a studio, whereas, 10 years ago, that room would have housed the entire company. And then imagine how difficult it would be to be creative in that environment. Just look at Assassin's Creed. Just animating one character in that game will involve a dozen or more people. It will run into thousands of man hours just to get that one character into the game. Now, if you want to redesign that one character's animations, well, you've pretty much just wasted the entire animation budget for Time Splitters 2. Games are now just too big to support this kind of revision. They can't be organically grown. They just have to get up to speed and stick to the plan. How do you convince a non-gaming corporate guy that he now needs to spend a few $100,000 redesigning the game because it will be slightly better? It just doesn't happen. This is why we'll see like one game will bring out a fairly innovative feature and then we'll just see it deployed again and again and again, not just by the same developer but by other developers just copying it. This is a very risk-averse way of integrating new features and it is much cheaper than innovation. And this is the exact opposite of the spirit of 2005. And it's not just development costs either. In a speech in 2009, EA executive Rich Hillman said that EA will typically spend 2 to 3 times the development cost of a game on the marketing. Hundreds of millions of dollars will be invested in this game, so if it flops, then the studio gets closed. Hundreds of jobs will be lost. And so EA and other big publishers, they take the safe road, which is cookie cutter games, 10-year franchises. They want to maximize profit, so they include things like online codes and pre-orders and DLC, season passes, microtransactions, loot boxes, all that stuff. This widening Gaia, this growing disconnect between the ideas of innovation and the ideas of financial success has only grown over the last 10 years. We're now seeing what happens when an industry at large allows corporate investors and non-gamers to take control of creativity and design. Now, these incredible developers that I've been remembering, these are responsible for some absolutely brilliant, innovative games, but they're all basically gone now. They're either bankrupt, or they've been bought by big studios and folded in or fragmented up, or they've been forced into doing mobile or free-to-play. It feels as if the spirit of 2005 is being extinguished. You might say money kills art. You might say that limitation breeds innovation. You might say that necessity is the mother of all invention. You might also say that games cost too much to make nowadays. You might even say that they make too much nowadays. It's the risk being too high that stops people innovating. But you know what? There is a ray of light. The spirit of 2005 has a chance. Digital delivery platforms, crowdfunding, things like this, they question the continued need for these big corporate financial entities. Games like Senua's Sacrifice or Dark Souls did extremely well with small teams and with a limited budget. Both of those games bypassed the traditional route to market, and both of those games have met with financial and critical success. Both games heavily feature innovative gameplay, and they both have a story that's well worth telling. That is the spirit of 2005, alive and well. Games like Rust or PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, now they're not AAA games, certainly, they're not going to set the world on fire, but they aren't pixel platformers either. These games are picking their battles when it comes to where they spend their money, and they are proving that the medium-sized developer, the spirit of 2005, is a sustainable business model. Now, I'm going to leave you with a final thought. Now, this comes courtesy of Steve Ellis from Free Radical, who I love and we love on this channel, and he sums up what I've been trying to do for 15 minutes much more pertinently than I've been able to. The best days of Free Radical were always when we were a small team of 25 people, where everyone knew what everyone else was doing, and if you wanted to do something, you could. You didn't have to justify it to a publisher, you didn't have to write it down on paper. You didn't have a committee of people coming to look at it, to change it, and then just decide that it's a rubbish idea. You could come up with an idea in the morning and you could have it running by the afternoon, and then you could decide if it's a good idea by actually trying it out. That is a good environment for making games. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see some more with a similar vibe, then I would recommend Heavy Eyed's video about creative limitations. Also, Nova Canoe's videos about Jak and Daxter, Goodblood's video about the Crash Bandicoot series, and the Gaming Brits video about Ratchet and Clank. These boys are all much smarter than me, and they don't struggle to make a point as much as I do. Anyway, cheers for watching everybody, thanks very much. HP sauce is the king of condiments.
Perfect.